Was it desperate cry for help, a malicious prank, or a genuine haunting from beyond the grave? The Battersea Poltergeist. This story isn't about ancient castles or forgotten legends. It happened in a normal council house to a normal family. What they uncovered is a decade-long mystery that defies easy answers. In the mid-1950s, post-war Britain was focused on rebuilding. But for the Hitchings family, ordinary was about to end. At first, everything was as it should be. But then, small strange things started to happen. It began subtly. A silver key, one that had been in the family for years, suddenly vanished from the mantelpiece. A day later, it reappeared, lying right in the middle of Shirley's bed. Soon, other objects started behaving strangely. Furniture would be found slightly moved, as if shifted by an unseen hand. The family tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just forgetfulness. Maybe someone was playing a prank. But the incidents grew more frequent and more unnerving. These were just the opening acts. The main performance was about to begin, and it was going to be loud. Then the noises started. It began with faint taps, like someone knocking gently on a distant door. These weren't the familiar creaks and groans of an old building settling. This was something else entirely. Intelligent. It often started late at night, jolting the family from their sleep. On several occasions, the knocking was so persistent that it disturbed the neighbors, who would come over, concerned and confused, asking what all the racket was about. The family discovered that if they asked a question, the knocking would sometimes reply. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. The focus of these events seemed to be Shirley herself. This observation would become a critical point for both believers and skeptics later on. Frightened and desperate for an explanation, the Hitchings family knew they couldn't handle this alone. When your house starts banging on its own, who do you call? Council inspectors visited the house multiple times. They checked the plumbing, the wiring, the house was sound. There were no faulty pipes, no electrical issues, nothing that could account for the violent, intelligent knocking. Next, the police were called not once, but on numerous occasions over several months. They were trained to look for rational causes, for burglars or pranksters, but what they witnessed at Wycliffe Road left many of them baffled. They noted that the sounds couldn't be traced to any source. In one particularly strange incident, an officer reported that the knocking responded directly to his questions, stopping and starting on command. The police were left with no answers. They were witnessing events that fell far outside their training and experience. This wasn't just a family's spooky story. It was a phenomenon documented in police ledgers and council records. Just when the family thought things couldn't get any stranger, the messages began to appear. The letters were hostile, confusing, and deeply personal. This entity claimed to have died in the house and was determined to make Shirley's life a misery, demanding that she leave. The appearance of these letters was as mysterious as their content. More alarmingly, messages began to be written directly on the walls and ceilings, allegedly appearing when Shirley was out of the room or even while the family was watching. Investigators, both paranormal and skeptical, examined the letters closely. However, others weren't so sure. They argued that the sheer number of messages, their sudden appearance furthermore, her limited education seemed at odds with some of the language and historical references found in the letters, however crude. It was no longer just bumps in the night. It was a direct psychological assault on a teenage girl. As the disturbances escalated, the story inevitably leaked to the press. Newspapers ran sensational stories detailing the moving furniture, the relentless knocking, and the strange spectral messages. With experts now weighing in, the central question became unavoidable. Was this a genuine haunting, a complex psychological episode, or a very clever hoax? The media frenzy brought in a new wave of investigators, psychologists, and paranormal researchers. They pointed to a theory known as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. The poltergeist in this view wasn't a ghost, but a projection of Shirley's own inner turmoil. Other experts leaned towards a more straightforward explanation: deliberate fabrication. It was possible, they claimed, for her to create the knocking sounds, move objects when no one was looking, and write the letters herself. If it was a hoax, how did she fool multiple police officers and other independent witnesses who saw or heard things when she was under direct observation? The case was full of contradictions. Shirley appeared genuinely terrified, and the constant stress was taking a toll on her health. But the most compelling piece of evidence against a simple hoax or a short-lived psychological breakdown was its sheer duration. Most hoaxes are exposed quickly. Most psychological episodes burn out. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Battersea Poltergeist case is its longevity. They persisted intermittently for over a decade, from the mid-1950s well into the late 1960s. To maintain such a deception for 12 years, from adolescence into adulthood with little to no reward, would require an extraordinary level of commitment. The activity seemed to follow a pattern closely tied to Shirley's life. This correlation seemed to strengthen the psychological explanation that the poltergeist was an externalization of her internal state. In the 1960s, Shirley grew up. She got a job, met her future husband, married, and eventually had children. The knocking became less frequent, the object stayed put, and the messages from Donald stopped altogether. The poltergeist, it seemed, had finally gone quiet. But the story wasn't over. In the 21st century, new technology and renewed interest would bring the Battersea Poltergeist back from the shadows. Decades after the knocking stopped, the Battersea case resurfaced. She tracked down the original Shirley, now in her later years, and gained her trust. She unearthed the original police reports, council documents, and newspaper clippings from the 1950s. But perhaps the most significant rediscovery was a set of old audio recordings. When modern audio experts analyzed these recordings, they found something curious. Some of the recordings even appeared to show the knocking responding directly to spoken questions, just as the witnesses had claimed. Of course, skeptics were quick to point out that audio recordings can be misleading, and our brains are wired to find patterns even where none exist. The consistency across decades of written reports, witness testimonies, and now audio evidence made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the entire case as a simple hoax. There is no smoking gun, no clear, undeniable proof that can end the debate. Instead, what we have is an accumulation of evidence, a mountain of small, strange facts that, when piled together, create something deeply unsettling. We have the testimony of independent witnesses, from neighbors to journalists. And we have the sheer longevity of the case, lasting over 12 years. Cases like this are uncomfortable because they resist clean explanations. If it was a psychological phenomenon, it was one that could physically interact with the world in ways that we still don't understand, witnessed by multiple people, and research centering on a single individual, escalating with stress and fading as that person matures and their life changes. The Battersea Poltergeist doesn't demand that you believe in ghosts. So what was it? A haunting by a troubled spirit named Donald? The unconscious psychic projection of a distressed young woman? And that profound uncertainty is precisely why, more than 60 years later, the Battersea Poltergeist still matters and still haunts us. Thanks for joining us on this dive into one of Britain's most compelling mysteries. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the unexplained. See you next time.